In the unforgiving dust of the 1870s Arizona territory, a father's desperate gamble didn't just seal his daughter's fate. It handed her over to a monster. Her name was Ilara Vance. She was raised on poetry and piano sonatas, a delicate flower in a world of dust and stone. But her father, Jebediah, had made a mistake, a terrible, ruinous mistake. And the man who held his debt wasn't interested in money. He wanted a sacrifice. Ilara was forced to marry the one man the settlers and soldiers spoke of in hushed, terrified whispers. Nantan Lupan, the wolf of the Chiricahua Apache. They told her he was a savage, a killer with eyes as cold as a winter night, a ghost who moved through the canyons, leaving only blood and fear in his wake. But in the vast, silent wilderness of his world, she would uncover a truth that would shatter everything she thought she knew. Because behind the fearsome legend, the warrior hid a story, a sorrow, and a secret that would either get them both killed or change the fate of the entire territory. This is the story of a promise made in terror and the love that bloomed in the most unlikely of places. The late August sun of 1875 was a merciless hammer, beating down on the Double V Ranch until the very air seemed to shimmer with defeat. For Ilara, the heat was an old enemy. But today, it felt different. It felt heavier. It felt like a shroud. From the porch of the clapboard house her father had built with his own two hands, she watched him. Jebediah Vance, a man whose shoulders were once as broad as the mesas on the horizon, now stooped and whittled down by worry. Their little patch of green, carved out of the ochre desert, was dying. The Sweetwater Creek was dwindling to a trickle. But their real trouble didn't come from the sky. It came on horseback. His name was Silas Blackwood, a cattle baron from Tucson with an appetite for land as insatiable as a plague of locusts. He'd squeezed out every small rancher in the valley, one by one. The Double V was the last holdout, and the Vance land held the key. The deep-set crystal springs, a source of water that never, ever ran dry. Blackwood didn't just want it, he needed it. Weeks ago, in a desperate gamble, Jebediah took a loan from Blackwood. He'd hoped a few good head of cattle could turn their fortunes around. It was a fool's hope. Blackleg fever swept through the new stock like a fire. The cattle died. And the loan, with its predatory interest, became an unpayable mountain of debt. That morning, Blackwood arrived. He didn't bring lawyers. He brought 4 grim-faced gunmen whose hands never strayed far from their holsters. Ilara had served them coffee, her hands steady even as her heart hammered against her ribs. She listened from behind the screen door as Blackwood laid out his terms. "Jebediah," Silas began, his voice smooth as oiled leather. "We both know you can't pay. I can take this land, your horses, your house, everything." He let the threat hang in the shimmering heat. Or worse. Jebediah's voice was a ragged whisper. "There must be another way, Silas. Give me more time." Blackwood chuckled, a dry, rasping sound. "Time is the one thing you don't have, but I have a solution, a way out for you." He leaned forward and his voice dropped. "The Apache are restless. Nantan Lupan and his band have been hitting supply lines. The army can't pin him down. People are scared. They want peace." Ilara frowned. Nantan Lupan. The wolf. She'd heard the whispers in town. A ghost. A demon. The man responsible for the massacre at Canyon Diablo. A monster. "What's that got to do with me?" Jebediah asked, his voice shaking. "I've been negotiating," Blackwood said, a conspiratorial gleam in his eye. "Through an intermediary. Lupan is a man of honor, in his own savage way. He's willing to agree to a truce. He will keep his warriors out of this valley, for a price." A cold dread began to creep up Ilara's spine. She pushed the screen door open just a crack. A gesture of trust, Blackwood continued. A permanent bond between our peoples. What kind of bond? Jebediah asked. And then Blackwood looked past her father. His eyes, like a hawk spotting a rabbit, landed directly on Alara. He will take a wife from the settlers, he said, a predator's smile spreading across his face. A bride to seal the pact. It shows we are offering our most precious, a promise of a shared future. The world seemed to tilt. The buzzing of cicadas grew to a deafening roar. And I, Blackwood said, his voice dripping with triumph, have suggested the perfect bride, a symbol of peace from the very land he will now be sworn to protect. Her father's face went slack with horror, then purpled with rage. You can't be serious, Jebediah choked out, stumbling to his feet. My daughter, you want me to give my Alara to him? It's a brilliant solution, Blackwood said calmly. Your debt to me is complicated. This arrangement clears it. The loan paid in full. Your ranch would be safe. The entire valley would be safe, thanks to your daughter's sacrifice. He savored the word. Get out, Jebediah snarled, his hand trembling. Get off my land before you what? Blackwood's voice turned to pure steel. You have nothing, old man. Refuse, and I'll take this land by sundown. And if you fight, my men will be happy to demonstrate the cost of such foolishness. He paused, letting the final venomous threat settle in the air. The choice is simple. Your daughter marries the chief, or I burn this ranch to the ground, with you inside it. Then Alara stepped out onto the porch. All eyes turned to her. She saw her father's broken face, the raw fear and shame. She saw Blackwood's smug, triumphant grin. And she saw the parched land that was the only home she had ever known. Her life of poetry and piano sonatas had just been shattered. Her voice, when it came, was surprisingly clear, frighteningly steady. I'll do it. No, Jebediah spun around. Alara, you don't know what you're saying. He's not a man. He's a demon. And what other choice do we have, father? She asked, her gaze locked with Blackwood's. To die here for pride, to let him destroy everything you built. She turned her eyes, filled with a terrifying resolve, to the cattle baron. You will put it in writing. My father's debt is cleared, and his title to this land is his, free and clear, forever. Signed and notarized by the territorial judge in Tucson. Blackwood's smile widened. He had won. Of course, he purred. An astute negotiator. Be ready in 2 days. A party will come for you. They won't be gentlefolk, Miss Vance. I'd advise you to be compliant. He and his men rode off in a cloud of dust, leaving a profound, suffocating silence in their wake. Her father collapsed into his chair, the sound of his ragged sobs the only noise in the vast, indifferent landscape. But Alara did not cry. She couldn't. She felt as if every tear inside her had been boiled away by the sheer heat of her new reality. In 2 days, her life would be over. Or perhaps a different, unimaginable life was just about to begin. She looked out toward the distant, hazy peaks of the Chiricahua Mountains, the domain of the wolf. They looked like jagged teeth against the bruised twilight sky. And soon, they would be her home. The 2 days passed in a blur of suffocating dread. Alara packed a single small trunk, her mother's silver locket, a worn book of Keats's poetry, a spare calico dress. Each item felt like an artifact from a buried life. Her father moved like a ghost, his eyes red-rimmed and vacant, consumed by a guilt so profound it was a physical presence in the room. On the morning of the 3rd day, they arrived. They were not Silas Blackwood's men. They were not soldiers. They were 5 Apache warriors, materializing from the heat and dust as if conjured from the earth itself. They sat on their ponies at the edge of the property, silent, watchful. Their presence was more unnerving than any armed posse. Lean, hard men with black hair held back by cloth bands and dark eyes that missed nothing. One of them, a stern-faced man with a deep scar running along his jaw, dismounted and walked toward the porch. He didn't speak. He just gestured toward Alara. It was time. The farewell was brutal. Jebediah grabbed her in a fierce, trembling hug. "I'm so sorry, Ellie," he choked out. "I've damned you." "You did what you had to do to survive, Father," she whispered back, her own voice betraying a tremor. "Now I must do the same. Live. Keep the ranch for me." She pulled away before she could break down. With her back straight and her chin held high, she walked toward the waiting warriors. The scarred man took her trunk and tied it effortlessly to a pack mule. He pointed to a small, sturdy mare. There was no saddle, only a thick woven blanket. Alara had ridden her entire life, but never like this. She hiked up her skirts and awkwardly pulled herself onto the horse's back. The warriors watched, their faces impassive masks. Without a word, their leader turned his pony, and they set off. Ilara in their midst, a prisoner in all but name. They traveled east towards the Dragoon Mountains, a natural fortress of granite and pine. The journey was grueling. The sun was a hammer. The landscape was a blur of rock, sand, and spiny cactus. They offered her water from a skin bag and strips of dried meat. She accepted gratefully, refusing to show weakness. They spoke to each other in their own tongue, a series of clicks and soft guttural sounds as alien as the landscape. They never spoke a word of English to her. She was cargo, a package to be delivered. The isolation was absolute. At night, she huddled on the opposite side of their small, smokeless fire, staring up at a sea of cold, distant stars. On the fourth day, they entered the mountains. The air grew thinner, cooler. The terrain became a treacherous maze of narrow canyons and steep, rocky inclines. Late in the afternoon, they crested a high ridge and pulled to a halt. The scarred warrior pointed. Below them, nestled in a hidden valley, was the Apache stronghold. Their rancheria. It was larger than she had imagined. Dozens of dome-shaped huts, called wikiups, were scattered amongst the pines. A clear stream snaked through the center of the camp. The sounds of life, children shouting, dogs barking, the low murmur of voices, rose to meet them. Her heart hammered against her ribs. This was it, the point of no return. As they descended, a hush fell over the camp. People emerged from their homes to stare. Women stopped their work. Children fell silent, their dark, curious eyes fixed on her. She was a specter at the feast, a white woman, an omen brought into their sanctuary. Her escort led her through the center of the camp toward a wikiup slightly larger than the others, set apart on a small rise. An old woman with a face like a wrinkled map sat by the entrance, weaving a basket. She watched Ilara's approach without expression. The warriors dismounted. The leader gestured for her to do the same. Her legs were so stiff she nearly stumbled. And then he emerged from the wikiup, Nantan Lupan, the wolf. The stories had not done him justice. He was not the hulking beast of settler nightmares. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a lean, powerful build. He moved with a liquid grace that was both beautiful and deeply intimidating. His face was all sharp angles and stark planes. Scars, thin and white, marked his skin, one high on his cheekbone, another disappearing into the collar of his buckskin shirt. But it was his eyes that held her captive. They were dark, so dark they seemed to pull the light from the air. And they were filled with a profound, chilling stillness that seemed to strip her bare, seeing every fear, every doubt, every ounce of her defiance. There was no cruelty in them, but there was no warmth either. There was nothing. It was like looking into the void. He listened as the scarred warrior, his lieutenant, Jew, gave a brief report in Apache. Throughout the report, the chief's eyes never left Ilara's face. When Jew finished, the chief gave a curt nod. The warriors dispersed, melting back into the life of the camp. Ilara was left standing alone before him. The entire camp was watching. The silence was absolute. He took a step toward her. She flinched, an involuntary reaction she instantly regretted. His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He stopped. He spoke a single sentence in Apache. His voice was not the savage growl she expected. It was a deep baritone, quiet, yet it carried with undeniable authority. The old woman who had been weaving rose slowly and came to stand beside Ilara. Her voice was raspy, like dry leaves skittering across rock. "He welcomes you," she translated into broken English. "He says this is your home now." Home, this place of dust and fear, this cage of rock and suspicion. And this man, this feared warrior whose eyes held the emptiness of a winter sky, was to be her husband. The word was a mockery, a bitter pill of ash in her mouth. The ceremony was that night, a dreamlike horror. Ilara was dressed by the old woman, Ishka, in a soft deerskin dress that felt alien against her skin. She was led to a large central fire where the entire tribe was gathered. She stood beside Nantan Lupin, whose personal name Ishka had whispered was Taza. A shaman chanted in a low, hypnotic monotone. Smoke from sacred herbs stung her eyes. Their wrists were bound together with a strip of leather. They shared a piece of corn cake and drank water from the same clay cup. And that was it. She was married. Taza led her back to his wikiup, the leather cord still connecting them. Once inside, he used a small knife to slice the binding. The interior was larger than it looked, meticulously clean and sparse. Furs and woven blankets were piled neatly on one side for sleeping. His weapons, a bow, a quiver of arrows, a lance, and a rifle wrapped in hide, were arranged on the other. He gestured to the pile of furs. "You sleep there," he said. The words were English, perfect, unaccented English. Ilara stared at him, shocked into speechlessness. In all the days of travel, no one had spoken a word she could understand. She had assumed he couldn't or wouldn't. The discovery that he could, and had chosen not to, felt like a deliberate cruelty, a way to heighten her isolation. "You speak English," she stated, her voice barely a whisper. "I listen more than I speak," he replied, his tone flat. He turned his back to her and began checking the string on his bow. The conversation was over. He laid out a single blanket for himself on the opposite side of the hogan, as far from her as the small space would allow. He lay down, and within minutes, his breathing evened into the slow, deep rhythm of sleep. Ilara remained standing for a long time, a statue in a borrowed dress. This was her wedding night. She had been sold and delivered, and now she was being ignored. A strange mix of relief and humiliation washed over her. She finally sank onto the soft pile of furs, but she did not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the breathing of the stranger who was now her husband. The wall of his silence was more imposing than any fortress. The days that followed fell into a strange, monotonous pattern. Taza would rise before the sun and be gone. He would return long after dusk, eat the food Ishka brought for them in silence, and then take his place on his side of the hogan. He never touched her. He rarely looked at her. He almost never spoke. Ilara became a ghost in the village. The other women ignored her, turning their backs when she approached. The children would stare, but scamper away if she met their gaze. She was a pariah, the white woman. Her only human contact was Ishka. The old woman seemed to take pity on her, giving her tasks. grinding corn, scraping a deerskin, finding yucca roots. The work was backbreaking, but Ilara welcomed it. It kept her mind from spiraling into despair. Through these silent lessons, she began to observe the world around her. She saw mothers singing to their children, men laughing as they mended tools, and the deep respect they all showed their elders. It was a community, a family, and she was utterly outside of it. She also began to observe her husband, not the silent, imposing figure in their hogan, but the man he was among his people. She watched from a distance as he trained the young boys to shoot an arrow with lethal accuracy. He was a patient teacher, firm, but never cruel. She saw him speaking with the other warriors, his face animated as he explained a strategy. She once saw a small child trip and fall near him. Without a word, Taza knelt, helped the crying boy to his feet, and brushed the dust from his leggings before sending him on his way with a gentle pat. These small moments were cracks in the facade of the unfeeling warrior, glimpses of a man she did not know. The wolf was a leader, a teacher, a protector. But who was Taza? One evening, a violent storm rolled in from the mountains. The temperature plummeted. Inside the wikiup, the air grew damp and cold. Ilara, unaccustomed to the mountain chill, shivered uncontrollably beneath her single fur blanket. Taza, who had been sitting by the fireless pit, noticed her shaking. He stood. For a moment she thought he was going to approach her. Her body tensed. Instead, he walked to his own sleeping area, picked up his thickest buffalo hide, walked back to her side, and dropped it on top of her. He didn't say a word. He just returned to his spot and lay down, leaving her under the warmth of the heavy, musky fur. It was the first act of anything approaching kindness he had shown her. She lay there stunned, her shivering slowly subsiding. It was a small gesture, perhaps meaningless to him. But for Ilara, adrift in a sea of loneliness and fear, it was a lifeline. It was a flicker of light in the profound darkness. A hint that somewhere beneath the ice there might be something else, something human. She clutched the edge of the buffalo hide, buried her face in its unfamiliar scent, and for the first time since leaving her father's ranch, she wept. The gift of the blanket was a turning point. Not because it thawed the glacier between them, but because it allowed Ilara to hope that it wasn't permanent. Her fear of him was slowly being replaced by a deep, gnawing curiosity. Who was this man of violent contradictions? Her relationship with Ishka deepened as well. The old woman began to speak more freely, teaching Ilara the Apache names for plants and animals, the stories of the mountain spirits. One afternoon, as they sat mending a worn buckskin shirt, Ilara gathered her courage. "Ishka," she began, "my husband, Taza, why is he so silent?" The old woman's fingers paused. She looked out across the valley, her ancient eyes fixed on something only she could see. "The loudest screams," she said cryptically, "are the silent ones." "I don't understand," Ilara pressed gently. Ishka sighed. He was not always this way. Before, there was laughter in his voice. He was a young warrior, proud and strong. He had a wife. Her name was Sonsia Ray, Morning Star. Their love was a song for all to hear. Ilara's breath caught in her throat. A wife. Of course. He had a life before her. They had a son, Ishka continued, her voice heavy with sorrow. A little boy with his father's eyes. Taza was building a new life for them, a life of peace. He believed the words of the white men from Washington. He believed in treaties. She fell silent. Ilara waited, knowing the rest of the story would be dark. It was the time of the Bluecoats' betrayal. They said they came for peace talks at Apache Pass. It was a trap. While the warriors were away, a group of miners, drunk on whiskey and hate, attacked the camp where the women and children were waiting. They called it sport. The word was poison on her tongue. Sonsi Array, the boy, they did not survive. Taza returned to find only ashes and silence. He found their bodies himself. The world seemed to spin. The silent, cold man in her wikiup was not a monster. He was a widower, a father who had lost his child. His silence wasn't a rejection of her. It was the enduring echo of an agony she could barely comprehend. He became Nantan Lupin that day, Ishka finished, her gaze finally returning to Alara. The wolf. He swore he would never again trust the white man's words, only his actions. He fights not for glory, but so that no other Apache father will find his family in the ashes. Alara looked down at her own pale hands, suddenly seeing them as the hands of the people who had inflicted this wound. Her presence here, her very existence in his home, must be a constant, agonizing reminder of everything he had lost. She was not his wife. She was his ghost. Miles away, in Wilcox, Silas Blackwood was growing impatient. His plan had worked perfectly up to a point. He had the Vance land and its precious water. The Apache raids in the valley had stopped. But the second part of his plan wasn't happening. The part where the savage chief would kill his white bride, causing an uproar that would bring the cavalry down on the Chiricahua and wipe them out for good. His spies reported that the Vance girl was still alive. Blackwood needed chaos. He summoned his most reliable scoundrel, a disgraced army scout named Lefty Finn. "I need you to stir the pot, Lefty," Blackwood said, sliding a stack of coins across his desk. "I need an incident, something that can't be ignored." "What did you have in mind?" Lefty asked, pocketing the coins. "There's a small homestead, the Petersons, about 10 miles south of the reservation line," Blackwood mused. "God-fearing folk. Man, wife, 2 kids. Make it look like a raid, a brutal one." He leaned closer. "Take something, a piece of jewelry, a tool, something that can be planted in the Apache camp later. But most importantly, leave a clear Apache sign." Lefty's eyes glinted. "An arrow." "An arrow," Blackwood smiled. "Left right in the middle of the floor. Major Strickland at Fort Bowie is a man who shoots first and asks questions never. Give him an excuse, and he'll give me a war." A few nights later, Taza returned to the wikiup late. Ilara, pretending to be asleep, heard him enter. But his movements were different. She heard the soft scrape of hide as he unwrapped his rifle. Through her eyelashes, she saw him checking the action, his movements economical and precise. Then he sat cross-legged and began to sharpen his knife on a whetstone. The rhythmic shing-shing-shing was a deeply unsettling sound in the quiet of the night. A palpable tension had descended upon the camp. Warriors had been arriving and leaving in small groups. The mood was somber, coiled. Ishka's story had changed everything. Ilara no longer saw him as a captor, but as a man standing on the edge of a precipice. And she felt a terrifying, illogical urge to pull him back. She sat up. He didn't stop his sharpening, but she knew he was aware of her every move. "What is it?" she whispered. "What's happened?" For a long moment, the only sound was the scrape of steel on stone. Then the sound stopped. He looked at her, and for the first time, his eyes were not empty. They were filled with a cold, burning fire. "A family of settlers," he said, his English crisp and sharp. "Murdered. The soldiers found one of my people's arrows in their home." "But you didn't," she started, the words dying in her throat. "No," he said flatly. "It was not us. This peace was real. But your people do not want peace. They want a reason. They want a war." He placed the newly sharpened knife in its sheath. "And now they have one." He stood, grabbing his rifle. He was leaving. He was going to become the wolf once more, not by choice, but because he was being forced to. And Alara knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that Silas Blackwood's shadow had just fallen over them all. The rancheria transformed overnight. The quiet rhythm of the camp was replaced by the grim hum of a war council. The men's faces were set like stone. The women worked with a frantic, silent purpose, their movements shadowed by a familiar fear. Taza was at the center of it all, a vortex of calm, deadly authority. Ilara felt useless, an outsider more than ever. This was Blackwood's doing. She knew it as surely as she knew her own name. He had manufactured this atrocity to get what he wanted. A young boy, no more than 6, had been watching the warriors with wide, adoring eyes. His name was Avi, Little Bird. He was Ishka's grandson. Mimicking the warriors, he scrambled up a treacherous pile of boulders at the edge of camp. His foot slipped. A cry of pain cut through the tense air. Ilara and Ishka rushed over. Avi lay at the bottom of the rocks, his face pale and twisted in agony. His leg was bent at a sickening angle. It was clearly broken. The boy's mother ran to him, wailing. Ishka knelt, her face a mask of worry. "The bone is shattered," she said. A badly set leg could leave a boy crippled for life. A death sentence in this rugged world. Taza arrived, his meeting interrupted by the commotion. He knelt beside the boy, speaking to him in soft, reassuring Apache. Suddenly, Ilara was no longer the captive bride. She was Jebediah Vance's daughter, a girl who had set the broken legs of calves and foals her entire life. "I can help," she said, her voice cutting through the frightened chatter. Every head turned to her. Taza looked up, his eyes filled with disbelief and suspicion. "My father taught me," she said, meeting his gaze without flinching. "On the ranch. The bone must be set clean and held straight, or he will never run again." Taza studied her face, searching for something. He saw no fear, no deceit, only a fierce, focused determination. After a long, tense moment, he gave a curt nod. "Do it." It was the permission she needed. "Bring me straight, strong branches," she commanded, her voice taking on an authority that surprised even herself. "And strips of clean hide, and boil water." The women who had shunned her for weeks now scrambled to obey. Ilara knelt by Avi. "Ishka, hold his shoulders. Taza, hold his other leg. Hold it fast. This will hurt." She took the small, mangled leg in her hands. She took a deep breath, closed her eyes for a second, and then, with a swift, decisive pull and twist, she set the bone. The boy screamed, a raw, piercing sound, then mercifully fainted. Ilara, her own face slick with sweat, did not hesitate. She worked quickly, cleaning the cuts, packing them with herbs from Ishka, and then skillfully binding the leg between wooden splints, wrapping it tight and secure. When she was finished, she sat back on her heels, exhausted. The leg was straight. The boy was breathing peacefully. The camp was silent. Everyone was staring at her with a mixture of awe and shock. She had touched one of their children, not with malice, but with healing. Taza looked from the boy's perfectly splinted leg to Ilara's face. The fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by something she couldn't name. It was a look of profound reassessment, as if he were seeing her for the very first time. Later that evening, the camp had settled into a watchful quiet. Ilara sat outside the wikiup, her mind still replaying the events of the afternoon. The flap pushed open, and Taza stepped out. He walked over and sat on a log near her. It was the first time he had ever voluntarily sat beside her. "The boy is comfortable," he said. It wasn't a question. "He will be fine," she replied, not looking up from her mending. "The bone will heal clean." They sat in silence for a long time, but it was a different kind of silence. The wall between them was still there, but it felt thinner, less absolute. "Where did you learn such things?" he asked, his voice low. "My father," You learn to do for yourself in the territory, or you don't survive. You are not like the other white women, he stated. Ilara finally looked up at him. The firelight flickered across the sharp planes of his face. And you are not the monster they say you are. His jaw clenched. They made me a monster. I know, she said softly. Ishka told me about Sonsi Array and your son. The name of his wife, spoken aloud by this white woman, hung in the air like a ghost. He visibly recoiled, a wave of pain so raw it was hard to watch. He stood abruptly, ready to retreat back into the safety of his silence. I am sorry, she whispered to the ground. Truly, for what my people did, for your loss. He stopped. He turned back slowly, his face a mask of utter desolation. Sorry does not bring back the dead. No, she agreed, her voice thick with emotion. It doesn't. And this new reason for war, this attack, it feels wrong. It feels like a lie, designed to make you into that monster again. He stared at her, his dark eyes searching hers in the firelight. He saw the genuine conviction there. He had spent years believing all white people were liars. But this woman, his captive bride, had just saved an Apache child and was now speaking a truth he felt in his own gut. Blackwood, she said, voicing the name that had been tormenting her. The man who arranged our marriage. He wanted my family's land. He benefits the most if your people are gone. Taza's face hardened, but this time with a focused, calculating anger. It was not the blind rage of grief, but the sharp fury of a leader who senses a serpent in the grass. He had been so focused on the army that he had not considered the source of the lie itself. He knelt in front of her, so close she could feel the heat radiating from him. Tell me about this man, he said, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. Tell me everything. And so she did. Under the vast, star-dusted Arizona sky, with the threat of war hanging over them, Ilara Vance and Taza, the wolf of the Chiricahua, spoke for the first time. Not as captive and captor, but as two people bound by a common enemy. The ice had not just thawed, it had begun to crack. And in the fissure, something new and fragile and utterly terrifying was beginning to grow. Ilara's revelation about Silas Blackwood shifted the conflict from a war against soldiers to a hunt for a snake. Taza dispatched his most trusted scouts to Wilcox, not to fight, but to watch Blackwood and Lefty Finn. In the tense days that followed, a profound change occurred between Taza and Ilara. The silence that had once defined them was now filled with quiet conversations. He taught her the ways of the mountains. She told him of a world of books and music. One evening, he found her staring at the distant plains. You miss your home, he stated. I miss the music, she confessed. My mother had a piano. Sometimes I fear my hands have forgotten the melodies. Later he returned and pressed a small, carved wooden flute into her hands. It is not your piano, he said gruffly, but it can make music. The gesture was more intimate than any touch. As she hesitantly played a simple, haunting tune, he listened with his eyes closed, and the wall between their two worlds seemed to dissolve completely. Their fragile peace was shattered by the frantic return of a scout. Major Strickland and a full company of cavalry were marching from Fort Bowie, spurred on by the planted evidence. Worse, Silas Blackwood and a posse of 20 men rode with them, claiming they were coming to rescue the Vance girl. He's coming to finish the job, Ilara said, her blood running cold. He needs me dead to complete his story. He will use the soldiers as his shield, Taza concluded, his face a grim mask. He plans to have us all wiped out. The warriors prepared for a fight they could not win. Taza began giving orders to move the women and children to a safer, hidden canyon. You will go with them, he told Ilara. No, she said, her voice resolute. She stood before him, no longer a captive, but a partner. "This is my fight now. You cannot win against both the army and Blackwood in a direct fight. He's expecting you to fight like a cornered wolf." She pointed to the east. "Blackwood will use the old miners' trail to try and get behind you. He thinks he's clever. But I know that trail. I know a place, the Shadow Caves, a perfect place for an ambush." Taza stared at her, seeing not a white woman, but a warrior with the heart of the Chiricahua. He made a decision that went against every instinct grief had taught him. He chose to trust. Turning to Ju, he gave the order. "Take half our warriors. Draw the soldiers deep into the main canyon. Slow them. Do not break them. Make them follow you." Then he turned to the rest of his warriors, his gaze falling on Ilara, his hand finding hers. "Come with me," he said. "We will hunt a vulture in the shadows." Ilara led Taza and his warriors along the treacherous miner's trail, her knowledge of the terrain unerring. She pointed to a sheer, vine-covered rock face. "Behind there," she whispered. The hidden entrance to the Shadow Caves was exactly as she remembered. The trap was set. They would let Blackwood's posse ride into the narrowest part of the trail and strike from the rocks above, cornering them against the cliff's edge. "Stay in the cave," Taza ordered her, his eyes locking with hers in a promise and a farewell. "Do not come out." She retreated into the darkness as the sounds of hoofbeats and Blackwood's confident voice grew louder. Then a single war cry tore through the air, and the trail erupted into a storm of arrows and gunfire. The ambush was swift and brutal. Blackwood's men, caught completely by surprise, fell into chaos. Amidst the fighting, Blackwood, his face a mask of fury, spotted the cave entrance. Realizing Ilara was the source of the trap, he scrambled towards it, his revolver drawn. He burst through the vines, his eyes landing on her. "You!" he snarled, raising his pistol. "I'll kill you myself!" Before he could fire, Taza launched himself from a ledge above, tackling Blackwood. The two men crashed to the ground, wrestling for the gun. As they struggled, one of Blackwood's last men on the trail fired his rifle wildly. The bullet slammed into Taza's shoulder. He cried out, his grip faltering. Blackwood seized the advantage, shoving the wounded Taza aside and lunging for the fallen revolver. Seeing Taza vulnerable, Ilara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a heavy, loose rock and brought it down with all her strength on Blackwood's hand, shattering bone. He screamed in agony, his threat neutralized as the revolver skittered away. The aftermath was decisive. Blackwood and his surviving men were captured. When Major Strickland's cavalry finally arrived, they were met not by hostile savages, but by a victorious war party and their white-knuckled captives. Lefty Finn, seeing the game was up, confessed everything, exposing Blackwood's entire conspiracy. That night, Ilara gently dressed Taza's wound in the quiet of their wikiup. The battle was over. Her name was cleared. "You are free, Ilara," Taza said, his voice heavy. "Your father is waiting. You can go home." She paused, looking from his face to the small, intimate space that had become her world. She thought of her father's ranch, of the life she left behind, and knew it was no longer where she belonged. She met his gaze, her heart open and certain. "I am home," she whispered. A slow smile transformed Taza's face, washing away years of pain and sorrow. He reached out with his good hand and gently cupped her cheek. He leaned in and kissed her, a kiss that sealed not a treaty of peace between two peoples, but a pact of love between two souls who had found their sanctuary in each other. The story of Ilara and Taza is more than just a tale from the Wild West. It's a powerful reminder that our greatest enemies are often the prejudices we hold and the stories we tell ourselves about others. Theirs was a journey from terror to trust, from a forced marriage to a bond that would redefine their lives, and bring a lasting peace to a valley torn by hatred. They prove that courage isn't just about facing bullets and arrows, but about having the strength to see the humanity in someone you were taught to fear, and the bravery to open a heart you thought was closed forever. In the untamed wilderness of the human soul, they found their true home. If the story of Alara and Taza's unexpected love and unwavering courage moved you, please show your support by giving this video a like, sharing it with someone who loves a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. We have many more tales from the untamed West where history and heart collide, and we'd be honored to share them with you. Thank you for listening.